Welcome to Mi Gente on Air on 100.5 and 790 News Radio WSGW and online WSGW.com. Now, here is your host, Larry Rodarte.
Good evening. Welcome to another edition of Mi Gente on Air. And today I've got a special show. I was invited to talk with United Shades of Grey with Kareem Bone. And so I was on his show and I was able to answer questions that he had from his perspective. And I think it went really well. So we're going to play that as part of my show, Mi Gente on Air, today.
This is one of those programs that we have very honest, heartfelt dialogue. And, you know, we want to portray ideas and thoughts that may not necessarily be consistent across the board. So everyone has an opinion, and this is just a variant opinion. And so it's important for us to have those out there so that when we live, we have something that we can gauge our conversations and how we think by them. If we always only listen to those who are just like us, who think just like us, and we operate in silos, then we don't really get the benefit of why we are all so diverse in our background. So if you're watching via social media, you will see that there's another mug in the camera with us. That is Larry Rodarte, one of my compadres from over at Mi Gente Online. And so he's with us today. Larry, give a shout out to our USG audience.
Hello. Thank you, Kareem, for having me today.
And so he just gave, it's funny because normally Jonathan, who is my producer, usually comes in and he says, hello. And you just stole his intro. So I don't know. I don't even know what to expect. We're going crazy in the studio on today. But Jonathan, what's going on?
Well, Mark's not here, so I'll take his hey now.
Hey now, you're an all-star. Get your game on. Go.
It's when you're sitting in this chair that we respond to you that way because we're looking directly at you.
Okay. All right. I feel that. So we have Larry here today. I visited his show a few weeks ago, and I think I really enjoyed my time with you. And it's kind of we cross-pollinate our shows. I know that you were recently on Art Lewis not too long ago.
Mm-hmm.
I did Art just a little bit ago. And so we try to make sure that our listeners are able to kind of just get a sense for the other things and the other programming that's taking place. Larry, why don't you share a little bit with our USD audience who's out there what your purpose and what your goal or your aim is for Mi Gente, and also share with us when can they listen to it?
Well, it's on every Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. That's when we actually record the show. And sometimes if we can't made our schedules together, my producer and I, then we will actually record on Fridays. But as long as we've got a show that's available for Saturday and Sunday, when the show actually airs 8 p.m. on Sundays and 5 a.m. on Saturdays, then we're good. But, the whole idea is to promote Latino culture, to promote Latino contributions and concerns. And so that's what we have done in the last 5 years when management here at Alpha Media, now Conocer, called me in a meeting, and you were a part of that whole thing and the development of Mi Gente on Air. So I want to thank you for that. And I can't believe it's been 5 years already. But that's what we do. We're just like you. You're my counterpart, and United Shades of Grey. I listen to it. I sometimes tap in there, and I pretty much agree most of the time. If not, I'll make a comment. And I think that these shows are really important for our community so that there is that other voice. Because if you're listening to WSGW, the programming is definitely...
What kind of programming are we normally listening to?
Yeah, we're typically listening to right-wing programming. Sean Hannity and all, which I do listen to at times because you have to kind of know what everybody's feeling.
Yeah.
And, it's really important, I think, that we have this voice in our community. And as I've always said, I really didn't want to do this. I was already kind of looking at my retirement years or whatever, and I was doing the magazine. I'm selling, tacos on the side as well as a food truck.
Yes.
Yeah, patitos. But I knew that we had to have a voice at the table as Latinos in our community, in our greater community. And so my father had just passed away. I wasn't feeling it, but I said, you know what? I better go and do this because there many, many years ago, before Jonathan was even born, I went to Specs Howard Broadcasting School in Detroit.
Really?
Yeah, after I graduated with a bachelor's degree at Michigan State University in communications.
Go Green.
Go Green. And so I thought, well, I worked in broadcasting many, many years ago. I was a AAA traffic reporter throughout the state of Michigan, believe it or not. And my first job outside of Specs Howard, which Specs Howard just recently passed away, the founder of that media program. It was a great school. We learned how to do, by cutting tape and everything the old school way.
Yeah.
And so, I think it really prepared me to be able to have confidence and have a voice. And so when they asked me here to have my own program, I actually wanted to get away from the idea of it being called Mi Gente in any way, shape, or form. Because,
why is that?
Well, because after I had been publishing 25 years, and sometimes I just felt that I wanted, you want to start new. You want to reinvent yourself a lot of times.
So Larry, some of those that are listening may not understand what you mean when you've been publishing and why you were hesitant of using the name.
Yeah.
So this kind of cleared up.
Yeah. Well, in 1995, I came into the community from Detroit. Actually, I had recently gotten married. My wife had 4 sisters, and so it was very difficult to live in the Detroit market area because we were coming home every weekend.
Yeah.
She wanted to be with her sisters or what have you, and so we were coming back and forth, and all of a sudden Selena the singer died, the Tejano singer. Selena Quintanilla Perez, and so it was devastating. I mean, people don't realize what a big impact that was for Latinos because she was Tex-Mex, she was a Mexican-American citizen like us, and but she was rising and crossing over.
Larry, let me ask this question, though, because I think that you said it correctly. People don't understand really what she represented to La Cultura.
Yeah.
So why don't you explain why her, of all of the different individuals, folks who I consider iconic, what was it about Selena's?
Well, Selena, she really had it all. She had the look, she had the talent, she had the charisma, her native language was English. She didn't speak Spanish when she started out. She learned Spanish eventually, but she was singing in Spanish.
Yeah.
She did it all. Selena really did it all. And when she passed, unfortunately, she was at the top of her game, ready to cross over into the English market. And thank God we have the few songs that she did record her last album in.
Yeah.
I Could Fall in Love, and there's a few of them that really hit big. Thank God we have that because it gave us an indication of what was to come.
Yeah.
Even though she was, shot down in cold blood by the president of her fan club, And one of the things that I was really affected by, because I was in mourning. I was really in mourning. I mean, it was like the big celebrity death that really hit me.
This is Whitney Houston, Michael Jackson. This is like epic.
Yeah.
Someone said to me that had Selena had an opportunity to continue, there would have been no need for Jennifer Lopez.
It's true because Jennifer Lopez's career kind of came off of
Yeah.
Selena the movie. Although Jennifer was doing her own thing.
Yeah.
The show that she was dancing on.
In Living Color.
Yeah, in Living Color. So she was, I think she was on her way. She's beautiful, and I think she would have also had a career. Maybe not to the extent that she has today.
Yeah.
But, Selena, when she passed, it was devastating to our whole community. You knew, it was just like John F. Kennedy. You knew exactly, not that I was alive when John F. Kennedy died, but everybody talked about how they knew where they were when he died.
Where we were.
And that's how in the Latino community, you knew where you were when you heard the news. It was devastating. And so, one of the things I remember was shock jock Howard Stern, who, in those days, he wasn't the Howard Stern that he is today.
Yeah.
He was more vulgar. And he talked about Mexican Americans worshiping velvet Jesuses, and that they had gunshots in the background, making fun of Selena's passing.
Wow.
And so that affected me, and I said, you know what? I said it to my fiance at the time. I said, I should just start my own publication and, get the word out there, because I was working in Detroit for a president of a company who one of my main jobs was doing a company newsletter for one of the big 3 companies. And so there I go, and I started Mi Gente, and it went like hotcakes because we put Selena on the cover. I don't know how I had the inclination to contact L'Oreal for that beautiful picture that I put on the cover when she was one of the models for their hair products and stuff. but it just took off like
so
crazy.
so did you get so that you could have the rights to publish, right?
Yes,
Okay.
because I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to get sued or anything. And you in those days, it was a whole different ballgame than it is today, because everybody uses everybody's stuff today, even though you're not supposed to. But in those days, you could actually get sued. So I made sure I covered my T's, or crossed my T's and dot my I's, and we took off. And it was amazing how everybody responded to it in this community.
Do you think, and we're talking about the voices of the culture in essence, she represented something, I think, because she wasn't trying to be, gringo. She wasn't trying to be white. She was really embracing the fullness of her culture, right?
Yeah.
And bringing her whole self. Do you think that has there been anyone that's been able to kind of walk in that path?
Not to that extent that she was. We had Gloria Stefan. We
I
go
love
back.
Gloria Stefan.
Yeah, and I love her too. We go as far back as Ricky Ricardo on the Lucy show.
Yeah,
a Cuban American who came. Well, he was Cuban. He came over. But he was really the one that broke the barrier. And then we had Richie Valens, I should say, and then Gloria Stefan. But with Selena, because the population here in America that are Latinos are predominantly Mexican Americans or from Mexico, this was one of our own. This was somebody who we had never had before. We had Mexican regional singers that were big and had taken off as well, but only in that genre. This is one that she was big in the Tejano genre,
That's
which
what I was
was
gonna say, yeah.
Mexican Americans. Tejanos, that's what my roots are. My father came from Texas, from Uvalde. And so we really, even my dad, I remember, he connected with Selena. So you had generations of people, not just the young people. It was a whole generation of Mexican Americans that connected with her.
All right, so I want you to clarify, to give some greater clarity to a couple of things you presented. One of those is, so when we think about black music, quote unquote black music, we think R&B, rhythm and blues. We think hip hop. We think rap. Folks understand that because that music has been so pervasive in the landscape of music. We know when we hear the good old classics, the R&Bs, we have now come into a full awareness of what hip hop is, and that it's culture driven, and that rap was that initial expression, raw initial expression. Explain the differences you gave, Tejano music versus other forms of Latino music, that people may not understand those subtle differences, like the big band music. What's the difference? What are the leading forces or the leading sounds?
The Tejano music, I think, at its core is the accordion, and that's coming from the German polka, the polkas that they used to, and it's really something how the accordion has crossed waters. Because when I was in the country of Serbia in 2018. And when I went to a trumpet festival that the family that I was staying with, they took me to, and the first song I heard was Las Mañanitas playing by the trumpet in Serbia.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how does Las Mañanitas is the birthday song for Mexican in the Mexican culture, and here it is being played in Serbia.
That's
and
wild.
So I did some research and found out that there were immigrants that actually went from Mexico to Serbia way back in the early 1900s, and that's the influence that they left. And it's just like in the Polish and the Germans, they taught somehow and had crossed over into Mexico and taught them the accordions, and that's what's really the difference when it comes to, say, like Mexican regional music, right, where it's the guitar, and we have incorporated the guitar with Tejano music as well, but it's the keyboard, the accordion, and the guitar that makes the Tejano genre music. Now there's conjunto, which they call, and that's with the guitar, like in Mexican regional.
All right. So the other thing, and you said this, black folks are confused. Like, okay, Hispanic, and I think everyone is outside of the culture. We hear Latino, we hear Chicano, we hear Mexican, we hear Hispanic.
Yeah.
Explain to us these delineations between these terms that the community uses to express their ethnicity.
Yeah. It's difficult because every few years there comes a new term that they coin, like Latinx,
like African Americans and Afro Americans.
Yeah.
Now we're I get it. It's very similar.
Well, I want you to know that I consider myself Mexican American.
Okay.
Okay. When I was a young boy, I used to go around the house saying, my father's name was Valeriano, okay? And I would go around the house and say, Valeriano es Chicano, just to kind of rhyme or whatever.
Right.
And my mom stopped me. She said, no, your dad's not Chicano. And I said, well, what's a Chicano, And a Chicano was somebody who was protesting, assimilation into America. They were the Mexican Americans that stood up for the rights of the people. So kind of like the protesters today, but way back in the 60s. And there was the Chicano uprise in the 60s.
Wow.
Even at Michigan State University, your alma mater, Rosa Morales, all that group of people, Daniel Sosa, the former councilman, they all protested during that time period for better conditions for Mexican Americans that were attending the school, believe it or not. Now, when I went in the 80s, I was one of 48 Latinos at that university out of 48,000.
48?
Yeah, one of 48.
Wow.
Yeah. So you see where we've come a long way, right? And the thing is that Hispanic was a term that we all kind of assimilated to and got used to and utilized.
Yeah.
But come to find out, it was coined by the Census Bureau. I remember the lady, I did a story on this, and she's the one that coined it and made it popular so that people that were filling out the census forms, they had something other than white to fill out.
Really?
Us Mexican Americans,
right.
yeah.
Wow.
Or anybody who was of Latino descent. Now, I don't mind the term Latino, even though some get upset with that as well. But to me, that's everybody who is of Latin descent in these Latin American countries.
So what is the issue with Latino? Is it because it does not
include? It's not inclusive of Spain,
okay.
Which is our mother language, motherland, where the Spaniards came over, and they were the ones, along with Christopher Columbus, that mixed with the indigenous Indians that made the mestizo people of the Mexican race. So if we didn't have our Spaniard connection, there wouldn't be the Mexicans. They would just be the indigenous Indians of the Aztecs, the Mayans, and all the many Indian tribes,
which represents the largest portion of the population that's here.
Yeah,
in the States.
Yeah, and throughout Mexico, those indigenous Indians have descendants that are still living, and they still celebrate their individual languages and cultures and foods and everything. Every state in Mexico has a different type of indigenous Indian, believe it or not.
No. And when you go there and you can see it.
Yeah.
You can see one of the things, and I'm glad we're having
That's
this
a good point, because I'm glad you're saying that, because rather than just going there and laying on a beach, you're actually experiencing the culture that is so vibrant and so, it's so passionate.
And that's one of the things, wherever I go, I want to see, yes, I'm going to do the touristy thing, but I want to see what the people are like. So I get off the beach, you got to get inland, you got to go into the areas and see the people. Now, what was interesting is when we were talking about, the Afro-Latinas in Mexico, like I've seen a population of folk who are darker than I am with afros who are considered, they're Mexican.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because we don't see that as a picture of what we think of when we think Mexican.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the diversity that exists there.
There is great diversity from, any Mexican or in Mexico as well as Mexican American. There's diversity because, you had, just like in Puerto Rico, the Africans that mixed with the indigenous again, and that's how you get the Puerto Rican race, believe it or not. And then, the Africans also mixed with the indigenous Indians of Mexico, and that's how you get the Afro-Mexican race. That's the darker race that you see in Mexico. There is, I think, a lot of racism within Mexico, similar to America, but there's a lot of classism.
I was going to go there, so I'm glad you said. Let's talk about that a little bit, because here in the States, when it comes to African Americans, we refer to it as colorism. Light skin versus dark skin. There was a thing called the paper bag test back in the Renaissance days, where if you passed, you were lighter than the paper bag, you could pass. We call it passing. Mm-hmm. You could pass for white. If you were darker then you couldn't pass, and there was, benefits to being able to pass. Do those same types of dynamics exist in the Latino culture?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I've lived it. I've experienced it. In fact, I remember very young my mom, because she came from Saginaw, born and raised in Saginaw, but came from the era of the 1940s Saginaw High era, and she used to refer to African Americans as colored. And I said, "Well, what color are they, Mom?" Because I was already in the. It was this. This is probably a conversation in the late '80s, the '90s, and she would get upset with me for saying that. But I wanted to teach her, that that's not really acceptable. But the older generation, they just went by what they knew.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that my mom, her name was Anita, always hated her name. So she said that in school that her name was Annie and that she was from Spain. She never stepped foot in Spain. She was, but it was because of how they were treated.
Absolutely,
and especially here in Saginaw. Now I get it. We come from different lands or whatever. We're all supposed to assimilate or whatever, and that's how we were indoctrinated. I think in schools. I went to Bridgeport, Thomas White Elementary. I always heard about Dick and Jane, never about any other culture or whatever. And so I realize now how our history has been kind of erased.
Yeah.
When we talk about the Alamo, I was just recently there in December. Everything was Davy Crockett. Well, they didn't talk about the other side. The other side was my side, believe it or not. In terms of my ancestry. And yet it wasn't portrayed as it was good versus evil. You know what I'm saying? And so, that's a concern. But anyways, I hope that I bring a clear definition of my culture to your show. And I think that's why you asked me here, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There is such a strong connection. We always refer to it as the Black and Brown Coalition. And I think that these conversations are so vitally important because as strong as we have been in terms of how we've walked together, there are so many subtleties that we don't even understand about one another.
Right.
We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back after this break with more United Shades of Grey with Larry Rodarte.
Spring is in the air. This is Mi Gente on Air on WSGW.
Good evening. Welcome to another edition of Mi Gente on Air. And today I've got a special show. I was invited to talk with United Shades of Grey with Kareem Bone. And so I was on his show and I was able to answer questions that he had from his perspective. And I think it went really well. So we're going to play that as part of my show, Mi Gente on Air, today.
Larry, we do a lot of coalition building. We do a lot of work together.
Mm-hmm.
But as we sit down and we have these conversations, what I realize we don't spend enough time doing is just talking and having these opportunities to talk about, hey, what does this really mean? We Black culture is so widely represented in popular culture today, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we look at the music, we look at the art forms, we look at the clothing, and we now see a strong emergence of Latino culture being represented in places and spaces it's never been before. What does that representation and being able to see the first of this or the first of it, what does that mean to you?
It means a lot. It means that we are being accepted. And so, that's one of the things. My mom was a storyteller. She would always tell me things, and then her aunt, my Aunt Della, she taught me a lot as well. And one of the things I remember them both saying is that when they went to school back in the 40s, their mother or my great-grandmother would make tacos for lunch. And they couldn't eat with the rest of the kids, not because they couldn't, but they didn't want to because they were embarrassed by their food. So they would go around the back and they would eat their tacos, and so that they weren't laughed at or whatever while kids were eating peanut butter sandwiches in school, And so that's where they came from, in that regard. And so, like I said, my mother, she was ashamed of her name. She said she was from Spain. That assimilation that was taking place, basically blacked out culture of ours, whereas nowadays we celebrate it in a much bigger way. And I want to regress a little bit in regards to Selena.
Right.
Selena, when she passed away, that's what prompted me to say, I should write my own publication so that we could counter those attacks, like what Howard Stern had said about her,
right,
and some of the negative connotations about her, because they tried to compare her to Madonna, the singer. And at that time, Madonna had an exotic kind of reputation, and that wasn't our Selena.
Exotic is being nice, Larry.
Yeah, that wasn't our Selena, right? And so that's one of the things that I wanted to counter as well with my publication. But you got to remember, Selena, Gloria Estefan, she knocked the door down, and Selena blast her way through that
Yeah.
door, right? Because then you had the emergence of Ricky Martin, Enrique Iglesias, Shakira, Marc Anthony. You had all these Latino artists, and it was really cool to be Latino in America. Do you remember that time?
Yeah, I do.
Now I'm making you recollect that because
No, I do.
because people forget about that.
Absolutely.
And then came Jennifer Lopez too, the emergence because of
Absolutely.
the starring in the movie and all. That was a great time to be Latino. Everything was, the food, the culture, everything was. And then came 2015. Donald Trump said, Mexico don't send their very best coming down that escalator. Everything changed, and now we're seeing at a time where, we're villainized. Because we're associated with immigrants and migrants.
But I want to talk about that because you used the term assimilation a couple of times. And do you think that there is a need, or that individuals that come to this country, whether they were born here, or that there is a need for assimilation to the American identity?
Well,
and what is that identity?
if you want a peaceful existence in America, then yes, it is. Okay. And you see what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
Because you got to realize when we look back at the history of Mexican Americans in this country now, we see how, yes, we assimilated. And, in my family, we really assimilated because my dad was so successful as a builder here with Rodarte Builders.
Yeah.
Even the name Rodarte, that's not how we said it, but we accepted it because
Right.
we had to assimilate, right? And the thing is that people, it was really difficult. And that's like the $1 million question you're asking because, if anybody comes into America, they should speak English, right? They should, assimilate into what American culture has been perceived as American culture, which Bad Bunny tried to change that at the Super Bowl. That's why he said, "Together we are America."
We didn't even talk about that.
I know.
Go
That's
ahead.
what I'm saying. There's so much.
Go ahead.
It's like I'm bursting with all this information today, right, Jonathan? But the thing is, what I want to say is that we now look back, my generation, I think, who aren't fluent in Spanish, because they told our parents not to teach your kids. You're going to, it's going to hurt them in the schools. They're not going to excel, But, I look at all these European kids that at such a young, early age, they know multiple languages, 3-4 languages. And, I think we really suffered as a culture because we lost our language.
So when you talk, and this is so interesting to me because in Black communities, assimilation, and it's not assimilation to the American principles or the ideals, because I think as a people, when we think of Black folks, Blackness is American. Okay, I think you can't get much more American than Blackness.
Even Ebonics is
Right,
American.
right,
Yes,
right.
I totally understand that.
And so hearing you say that there was this feeling that we needed to assimilate, and trust me, I think the pressure to assimilate goes across racial identities. But do you think that there is a greater push or burden on Latinos to assimilate because of their connection to the border?
I think there is in some instances where you have people who are really upset because if they hear Spanish in their surroundings, they get upset. Speak English. You're in America. When again, that's what Bad Bunny was trying to say. Mexico is America. I had exchange students from Mexico, 2 of them, right? They lived with me for the exchange year.
Right.
They would get mad every time I referred to the United States as America. We know it as America, as Americans, right? But it was offensive to them because they consider themselves American.
Yeah, we're not the only Americans.
Yeah, and it's not just Mexico and the United States. It's the whole continent, And I remember when Pope John Paul II came and he visited Mexico City, and there's a great affinity to the Catholicism in Mexico, of course, and that's why he went. But he deemed it the Our Lady of the Americas, meaning Our Lady of Guadalupe, because she represents all of the continent in America. Although she is the affinity to her specifically because the apparition happened in Mexico City, present day Mexico City, but she is Our Lady of the Americas. And people don't understand that. And, I think Bad Bunny was like one of the first on a national stage, such a big platform, to come out and say that, and people are still confused about it. Together we are. That's why he ran it off all those different countries at the end of his show. Remember?
Yeah, no,
and then he included Canada,
absolutely,
and Mexico and the United States.
Well, I think it was so exciting to me just to be able to see such diversity on TV.
Yeah.
I like it. It's funny because if you remember last year for the Super Bowl, it was Kendrick Lamar.
Yeah.
And Kendrick, when he got done, people were like, what happened?
They not like us.
I didn't get
they
it.
not like us.
But this is the crazy thing about it is that he was speaking English, but there is such a chasm between the black experience and black culture and mainstream American culture, and we speak the same language. Now, Mr. Bad Bunny, he took it to a whole new level. He says, I'm not speaking one stitch of English.
Yeah,
I'm going to do the entire show in Spanish. But what their kindredness is that after the show, people had to go back and they had to tune in and to talk with those people who were aware and spoke the language to decipher it. With Kendrick Lamar, people who
You
understood.
mean with Bad Bunny?
With both of them, because with Kendrick Lamar, he was speaking English, but the language and the messaging was it was another language that America didn't understand, even though what he was talking about were key episodes in America. Bad Bunny changed his language, and the same thing had to happen. There had to be people who understood it, that could decipher it. And when I think about that, what is the message that you say? And you kind of alluded to it, but let's go deeper. What was the theme that Bad Bunny was really trying to say in this climate where being Latino is scandalized? What was he trying to convey to white America about his ethnicity and his American roots and what it meant for him to be Puerto Rican and American? Because Puerto Ricans are Americans.
I think his bottom line, and he said it at the Grammys before, was love is greater than hate. And that, trumps, and I don't mean to use that word, but that trumps everything, because at a time when we are, being villainized and we feel the hatred towards us as a race, Bad Bunny rose above that. He rose above that. Didn't call it out for what it was, although he did call out ICE on the national stage, at the Grammys and all. But he said love is greater than hate, and that I think supersedes everything else, because we are feeling that at a time like we've never in the history of our country in America. I mean, individually we may have, and there may have been instances where Latinos or Mexican Americans felt the racism or what have you, but not on a scale of this magnitude where everybody is being affected by it. Everybody. And I don't care if you are, assimilated enough where you don't even consider yourself Latino anymore and you kind of forget about it. Or if you're somebody who, like myself, promotes my culture in a big way on a community level, we feel it. We all feel it. And if you don't feel it, your kids are surely going to feel it.
And I want to say this because when we talk about assimilation, for Black America, it's very hard for us to assimilate, or darker skinned Black Americans like myself. Assimilation is assimilation to a set of ideas and visions and principles. But I often struggle, I personally, as an African American who loves my history, who loves being an African American descendant of slaves, who embraces the idea of the difference that I bring to this community and that my people have brought. I struggle with a population of Latinos that really just like abandon their Latino-ness, if that's a word, their cultura, and where they come from, to embrace this idea of, I don't want to be that, I want to be associated with whiteness. Is that a problem in the culture?
Well, I'm just going to talk from my own personal.
Yeah.
I can't speak for the whole entire community.
Sure, you can. Let's do it right now.
Well,
He's speaking for all of it.
The thing is, I have friends that who are of Mexican American descent, who, it's funny. Within the last 5 years or so, we have really seen their true colors. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
It's offensive. It's offensive to me, and to feel that maybe they're better than anybody else. That's again that classism that you see in Mexico. Even like their Guatemala sends a lot of maids to Mexico.
Yeah.
Okay, and so the Mexicans sometimes they will look down upon these indentured slaves almost, because that's the work that they're doing, right? But that they have to make a living. They're poor countries, third world country, Guatemala and stuff, and so it's really hard to overlook sometimes in instances where somebody who's affluent and doing very well in Mexico to not have that good kind heart that we should all have, and not look at classism in that way. And I think classism is similar here in America as well, because if you're affluent, you're doing well,
right,
you kind of forget about where you've been and where you come from.
Forget the cause of the struggle, right?
And so many times in this environment where I get really upset because I come from a huge family, Kareem, huge. I mean, 1,200 descendants just alone in Saginaw.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And when you have, and of course you're going to have a diversity of people throughout, but when you have some that just totally forget that just one or two generations away. I have one cousin, her mother came and crossed the border, through the river.
Really?
Yeah, the Rio Grande. She didn't come illegally through a border, and yet she's over there touting the whole idea that as long as they come legally, well, if your grandma didn't come over,
check your track record.
Yeah, you wouldn't be here, lady. That's what I want to tell her, But I mean, it's those things. Is you can't forget that. You can't forget that we're all immigrants to this country. We all are, and it's just that's the thing is, I feel like it's part of that classism. Like, well, we have to assimilate as Americans, and that doesn't mean that you forget about your culture or your heritage.
At
because in our Latino cultures, our heritage is beautiful. And anybody who goes down to Mexico and sees it, like you said, you have the beauty of, and it's a whole different world, right?
It is.
It's a whole different world. But the colors, the vibrancies, the dress of folkloric dancers, and the food, is really in 5 years ago, and I'm going to say this, tacos took a whole different meaning here in Saginaw.
Man, Saginaw is the taco capital of the world. I promise you.
Well, the thing is if you go down, 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer now, maybe 7. If you go down to Southwest Detroit, that's where you can find the real authentic tacos.
In Mexican town,
yeah, because you've got Mexican immigrants that are opening up business or whatever, and they're thriving. They were thriving down there. I don't know so much now. A lot of them are scared, but they would actually have the taco that was the real taco that didn't have cheese, it didn't have lettuce. It had more of the cilantro, the onions, the carne asada. Those
which
really
makes
good.
the food taste so much better.
Yeah. You have to realize that Saginaw looked at a taco as a hard shell taco.
Yeah.
They used the Vargas tortilla, the taco bread. Yeah. They fried it up.
That's what it's called, taco bread.
Yeah. And so they looked at it when you ordered a taco, that's what they expected. I went through that change because I was selling food at the time, and we are now, we do sell our carnita tacos, which are more the Mexican style with not the American cheese or lettuce, but we also have our Tex-Mex taco, which is the potito, which has the lettuce, cheese, and tomato.
I love the potito.
Right. And so, but that's a big shift in culture for our community of Saginaw, because we are now closer to, making those more authentic tacos. Very few do I see on food trucks, like in the summer and that, where they're selling those hard shell tacos.
There was a yellow truck, though, that was out there that you could go and get some real good Mexican food.
Really? What was the name of it?
Man, what was the name of that? But no, I pulled up on you one time. You said, hey, I'm going to be over here. I think it was on South Michigan or North Michigan. Yeah. And you say, hey, I'm pulling up over here. And I think it's like, I'm on my way. It's interesting that, like, when we talk about tacos, and I got a whole taco community that's coming in the stream, but black folks love tacos.
Yeah, they do.
I don't. I'm going to tell you, Larry, I could eat tacos every single day. Give me some wingdings, some fries, and some tacos. That is a month's menu. What does it feel like when you see your culture, when you see your food and your culture and these other things be consumed, be embraced, be taken in and accepted, but yet your people are ostracized?
That's hard. That's really hard. And, recently there's been some videos that you see on social media where ICE agents went into a restaurant in Minneapolis that was serving Mexican food in a Mexican restaurant, and the owner came out and said, are you ICE? And they denied it. They denied that they were ICE, but they came from an ICE vehicle because the cameras in the restaurant showed it. And he said it was verified that they were actually ICE agents, and so the whistles started blowing, and they kicked him out of the restaurant, and it made a big impact, and it showed how they had the audacity to still go and do that, knowing what their life job is at the moment. They took that $50,000, right, and they are ICE agents, and yet they're going to go in there and feel that they can just eat the Mexican food, and it hurts. It hurts to see that, because
I think it's hypocritical.
It is. And the thing is, though, is that we want everybody to love our food, and they do, for the most part. In the wave of the adoration for the food, Mexican food in general, over the last 10 years is huge, because if you remember, when we talk about those tacos like that, the Saginaw taco was the hard-shelled taco. That's kind of what Taco Bell was selling. Yeah. And now people who know good Mexican food, they're not going to Taco Bell.
No, you ain't hitting
anymore.
Taco Bell. Not for real food.
Yeah. So, you might go on a late night when you're drunk, but no, Mexican food it's such a big part of our culture. And so people who are against, immigrants or migrants in this country, they need to, question whether what they may be perceived as doing, like you say, being hypocritical in that instance at all.
What do you think is you, Larry? What do you see as one of the misconceptions about the Latino community that you think white America just doesn't understand or doesn't get it right? Is there something out there that you think?
I think everything is pretty much out there. We've our passion, our love for family, having huge families. And the music, it's such a big part of our lives, and there's all these little things that we kind of do that we took for granted and didn't necessarily understand that they may not have celebrated, like loteria, which is Mexican bingo, or quinceañeras. It's just a part of our life that we've always known, and yet when I went to college at Michigan State University, there was things that I said that I didn't realize that they didn't understand, because it was the Mexican word for that, like I say secador, that's a towel. It's just something as simple as a paper towel, And so, I think that everybody in our country, diversity is a plus. And when you experience other people's cultures, you grow as a human being, as a person, and that's why I love going to Europe when I do, like I go to Italy or, Spain, and I experience that, because it's a whole different world, like you say, like in Mexico. And I feel like I grow as a person every time I do experience a different culture.
All right. I want you to give us, all, and myself and these listeners that are out there, give us something that we can say to honor the Latino community. Give it to us in Spanish. A little phrase of something that you can say that when we share that, or when we say that, it brings honor to the Latino culture.
Viva Mexico!
That's what you're going to give us.
That sums it all up.
4.9